This happened back in the summer of 2023, though honestly, calling it a summer doesn't quite capture it. To me, it will always be defined by the quiet, heavy dread that slowly filled the walls of our apartment, turning a place of comfort into something that felt entirely alien. My girlfriend had been planning a trip to California for 4 full months. If you knew her, you'd know that planning was her entire identity. She was meticulous, mapping out itineraries down to the minute, double-checking flight numbers, and organizing her life with military precision. She hated when things didn't go the way they were supposed to. Normally, I would have gone with her, but this was for her grandmother's birthday. Her grandmother was getting up there in age, and it was understood that this might be my girlfriend's last chance to take a quiet, meaningful trip with her. By the week before her departure, she must have had at least 5 full bags packed and lined up neatly by the closet door. "You can never be too careful," she always told me with a reassuring smile. That was the baseline of our normal. Routine, predictable, and safe. Which is exactly why, on the morning of her flight, the entire foundation of my reality started to quietly crack. I woke up to the harsh glare of sunlight streaming through the blinds. It was well past 9 in the morning. I rolled over, expecting the bed to be empty, expecting her to already be miles up in the air on her way to the West Coast. But she wasn't. She was still lying right there beside me, fast asleep, buried under the covers as if she had nowhere to be. Panic spiked in my chest. I sat up quickly and shook her awake, my voice frantic. "Hey, wake up. You missed your flight." Her eyes slowly fluttered open. She looked groggy, completely unbothered, staring up at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. When I frantically reminded her of the time, she didn't gasp. She didn't scramble for her phone to call her mother or the airline. Instead, she just let out a heavy sigh, rolled back over, and pulled the blanket back over her shoulder. "Oh yeah," she mumbled, her voice thick and detached. "The flight, honestly, it should be okay." "Be okay?" I repeated, completely flabbergasted, standing over the bed. "Don't you think you should at least call and let them know?" She grumbled a lazy, dismissive, No, everything should be fine," and within seconds she drifted right back to sleep. But as I stood there in the quiet bedroom, a strange, jarring sound cut through the silence. She was snoring. It was a heavy, rattling sound, something she had literally never done in the years we had lived together. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't physically drag her out of bed. Confused and shaken, I figured maybe she had already spoken to her family offline, maybe some sudden change of plans had happened that I just missed. So, I pushed the uneasy knot down into my stomach, got dressed, and went off to work like everything was normal. When I came back that evening, the apartment was dead silent. She was still home. I found her sitting rigidly on the couch, staring blankly at a turned-off, pitch-black TV screen. The shadows of the evening were stretching across the room, and she hadn't even bothered to turn on a lamp. When I walked in and greeted her, she snapped out of it with a sudden eerie jolt of high energy. "Honey, I'm so glad you're home," she chirped, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. "Tell me everything that happened at work today." We spent the whole night chatting, but the conversation felt hollow. It was like her mind was lingering somewhere completely different. I'd catch her drifting off, staring into middle space mid-sentence. She took agonizingly long pauses before responding to simple questions, even though her face wore a forced, wide smile. Suspecting that maybe something tragic had happened with her grandmother that she was afraid to tell me, I pressed gently later that night. "Hon, did anything happen to make you not want to go on your trip?" She stared at me for a long, agonizing beat. Her smile vanished entirely. Her face went completely, terrifyingly blank, but only for a split second, before it snapped right back into that cheerful expression. "No, not that I know of," she responded brightly. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," I replied cautiously, feeling a cold chill prickle along the back of my neck. The next few days blurred together into a strange, unsettling routine. She refused to leave the house. Not that I could completely blame her, she had already taken time off work, but she didn't even want to go for a short walk to the park, which used to be our favorite weekend tradition. She also stopped eating with me. Every night I would cook dinner, and every night she would politely decline, insisting she wasn't hungry. But that was a lie. I knew it was a lie because of what started happening in the dead of night. On multiple occasions, long after we had gone to bed, I woke up to faint rustling noises coming from the kitchen. When I quietly got up to investigate, I found her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by absolute chaos. Cereal boxes were ripped open, their contents scattered everywhere. Granola bar wrappers were torn to shreds. Milk was pooled on the linoleum. And stranger still, I'd find dry, raw ingredients, piles of uncooked rice and dry beans strewn across the floor around her. She'd just sit there in the dark, unmoving, until I retreated back to bed. By the end of the week, a dim, terrifying light bulb finally went off in my head. I approached her timidly as she sat on the edge of our bed, once again staring straight ahead at a blank wall. "Honey?" I inquired carefully, my throat tight. "Yes, sweet boy of mine," she replied lovingly, her voice dripping with an unnatural sweetness. I swallowed hard. "Whatever happened to your bags? Did you unpack them? I haven't seen your toothbrush or your shampoo anywhere in the bathroom." She didn't respond immediately. She just kept staring at the wall, treating me like I wasn't even in the room. Finally, she very slowly turned her head, and her hollow, dead-eyed gaze locked onto mine. "Honey," she whispered, her voice dropping into a gleeful, mocking tone. "You know that's none of your business." She wasn't angry, but that response chilled me to the bone. True to her word, she refused to speak to me for the next 2 days, and she wouldn't even share the bed with me. I let her have the bedroom, choosing to sleep on the couch, listening to the quiet, shuffling sounds she made behind closed doors. It wasn't until the night before she was supposed to return from her trip that she finally let me back into the room. Even then, she slept rigidly with her back turned entirely toward me. I woke up in the middle of the night to a violent ruckus coming from the kitchen. The kitchen light was on, casting a harsh yellow glow under our bedroom door. It sounded like an animal was loose in our home. Deep, guttural growls echoed down the hall, accompanied by the wet, sickening sound of aggressive chewing and tearing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slowly slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway, every floorboard feeling like a landmine beneath my bare feet. As I drew closer to the kitchen archway, the sound suddenly stopped. I froze, holding my breath, debating whether I should turn back or look around the corner. But the moment I took one final step forward, a voice shattered the silence. It was my girlfriend's voice, but it was twisted, angrier, harsher, and more hostile than I had ever heard human vocal cords stretch. "Go back to bed," she screamed, the command sharp enough to cut glass. The house plunged into absolute, suffocating silence. My mind raced, torn between fear and the desperate need to check on her. Ultimately, the raw terror won out, and I turned to shuffle back toward the bedroom. The second my foot hit the carpeted hallway, the wet chewing noises started up again behind me. I don't know how long I lay awake that night, staring up at the dark ceiling, desperately trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that she was just having a severe mental breakdown, that tomorrow she would be gone on her trip anyway. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a shallow sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the bed beside me was cold. The bathroom was empty. The hallways were empty. The entire apartment felt heavy, hollow, and utterly silent. I called out her name multiple times, but there was no response. Cautiously, I walked toward the kitchen to check on the mess from the night before, and that was when the real, unadulterated panic set in. There was blood smeared across the kitchen floor. Not human blood, at least not visibly, but raw, dripping carnage. Packages of raw chicken, thick steaks, and pork chops had been ripped open and scattered everywhere. Nearly all of it had been devoured, torn apart by something with teeth that clearly didn't care about cooking or presentation. My stomach churned. I felt dizzy, like the floor was dropping out from under me, whispering to my brain that I was losing my mind. I stumbled backward, desperately looking for a chair to steady myself, needing just 1 second to breathe. Before my legs could give out, the front door clicked. The deadbolt turned with a loud, metallic snap. The door swung open and sunlight flooded the entryway. "Honey," my girlfriend sang out, her voice bright, bubbly, and entirely normal, echoing through the blood-stained apartment. "I'm home. Can you come help me with these bags? I've got so much to tell you." I stood there in the center of the kitchen, staring at the raw meat scattered across the floor, listening to the cheerful sound of her footsteps rolling luggage across the welcome mat. "I haven't moved an inch since. Even now, sitting here writing this, living out what is supposedly my normal life again? I can't shake the feeling that she never actually came back from California at all, and worse, that whatever is walking around in her skin right now knows that I know. This happened back in the late 1970s, in a rural province tucked away in southwestern Vietnam. My grandfather was a quiet man, a decorated military veteran who had survived years in deep, unforgiving jungles and slept through heavy artillery fire. To him, the world was a practical, straightforward place. Ghost stories and village superstitions weren't just silly, they were completely beneath him. So, when he accepted a job as the night caretaker for an ancient, remote cemetery nestled deep in the rice fields, he didn't think twice about it. The graveyard itself was over a century old. During the daytime it was actually quite peaceful, though wrapped in a heavy, hollow stillness. Weathered, moss-covered headstones lined the overgrown grass, their surfaces so worn by decades of monsoons that the names engraved on them had long since faded into smooth gray stone. But as calm as it looked under the midday sun, the locals refused to step foot near the perimeter once darkness fell. They claimed the cemetery belonged to something called the Lantern Keeper. According to village rumor, a pale yellow oil lamp could be seen drifting silently between the rows of graves every night after midnight. The elders warned that if you only saw the light from a distance, you might live to tell the story. But if you made eye contact with whatever was carrying it, you would never see the light of day again. When my grandfather took over the watchman's hut, the outgoing caretaker offered him only one piece of advice before packing his bags for good. If you see a light wandering among the graves after midnight, stay inside. Don't call out. Don't follow it. And whatever you do, never count how many graves the light passes. My grandfather just chuckled. He told the old man that if thieves came to steal the brass altar offerings, he'd chase them down regardless. For the first 3 months, the job was entirely uneventful. The nights were long, quiet, and predictable. But near the end of the 7th lunar month, a time traditionally known as the month of hungry ghosts, the atmosphere changed. There was no moon that night. Thick, ink-black clouds swallowed the sky whole, cutting off any natural light. A harsh, unpredictable wind swept across the open fields, forcing the tall eucalyptus trees surrounding the cemetery to scrape against one another, making a sound like distant weeping. Around 1 a.m., my grandfather was sitting at his wooden desk inside the small guard hut. His black dog, who usually slept soundly at his feet, suddenly began to whimper. The dog ducked under the wooden bed frame, trembling violently, refusing to come out no matter how many times my grandfather called his name. That was when he noticed a faint yellow glow reflecting off the damp window pane. He stood up and looked out into the darkness. Out among the middle rows of tombstones, a tiny speck of light was moving. At first, he assumed it was just a local farmer hunting for frogs in the marshy grass. But as he watched, he realized the light was swaying with a slow, mechanical rhythm, weaving seamlessly through the narrow gaps between the headstones as if it knew the grounds intimately. He glanced at his wristwatch, 1:13 a.m. The light kept moving, never speeding up, never slowing down. The most unsettling part was the utter lack of sound. No sloshing mud. No rustling leaves. Just a solitary, flickering flame floating through the dark. Driven by curiosity and his stubborn refusal to be intimidated, my grandfather grabbed a heavy metal flashlight and opened the hut door. The moment his boot hit the bottom wooden step, a sharp, raspy voice shouted right behind him, "Don't go out." He spun around instantly, raising his flashlight. The doorway was empty. The hut was clear. Nothing but the howling wind filled the space around him. Swallowing his sudden unease, he turned back around and stepped out into the night. He advanced slowly, keeping his footsteps quiet until he was barely 20 meters from the light. The yellow lantern stopped directly in front of a nameless, mossy plot. My grandfather raised his flashlight and beamed it straight at the source. There was no one there. The oil lamp was hovering completely unassisted in mid-air, roughly 3 feet off the ground. Thinking someone had somehow rigged it to a tree branch as a cruel prank, he took 2 steps forward. At that exact second, an icy whisper breathed against the back of his neck, "Do not stand level with it." My grandfather whipped around, swinging his heavy light through the empty air. Nothing. When he turned back to the plot, the lantern had vanished. In its place, stretching deep into the oldest, most forgotten section of the cemetery, was a narrow dirt path that had definitely not been there during his morning rounds. Standing at the far end of this path was a tall, unnaturally slender figure clad in a long dark dye, holding the burning oil lamp by a thin wire handle. My grandfather later said the most terrifying thing wasn't the figure itself, but its geometry. It was impossible to tell if the figure was facing toward him or turned away. Its body sat in absolute shadow, and where its face should have been, there was only a void of pitch-black darkness. Then the figure began to walk. Its steps were agonizingly slow, yet somehow the space between them seemed to collapse impossibly fast. Within a matter of seconds, the figure closed a distance of 50 yards, coming to a halt less than 10 meters away from where my grandfather stood paralyzed. From back inside the guard hut, his black dog let out a desperate, echoing howl. The figure froze. Slowly, smoothly, it raised the oil lamp above its hidden head. The yellow flame flared violently, casting a wide, unnatural ring of golden light across the surrounding cemetery. My grandfather's heart nearly stopped. The old, cracked tombstones caught in the light were suddenly transformed. They looked pristine and brand new. On every single headstone, an oval ceramic portrait of the deceased had appeared. Hundreds of silent faces in those photographs turned simultaneously to look directly at him. They weren't smiling. They weren't scowling. They were just staring, unblinking and vacant. Panic finally broke through my grandfather's military discipline. He turned to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He looked down and saw pale, waterlogged hands breaking through the damp earth around his feet, wrapping around his ankles with an ice-cold, vice-like grip. The more he thrashed, the tighter they squeezed, pulling him downward. Then the lantern keeper spoke. "There is room now." The voice didn't come from a single point. It echoed from everywhere at once. It sounded like dozens of overlapping voices, men, women, children speaking in chilling unison. Every tombstone began to vibrate. One by one, the carved names melted off the stone surfaces like wet paint, leaving a single, smooth, blank headstone directly in front of him. The figure reached into its dark robe and pulled out a long calligraphy brush. Leaning down, it began to stroke black ink onto the blank slate. Unable to scream, my grandfather watched as the brush traced out the Chinese characters of his own full name. Before the final stroke was completed, his black dog charged out from the shadows, clamped its teeth into the hem of his trousers, and yanked him backward with desperate strength. My grandfather lost his footing, fell heavily, and cracked his head against a stone edge before everything went black. The next morning, local villagers found him unconscious near the center of the cemetery, nearly 300 meters away from his guard hut. Strangely, there were no footmarks in the mud around him, only a single long drag mark through the dirt. Most disturbing of all, despite the heavy downpour that had turned the ground into a swamp, the soles of his bare feet were coated in thick, bone-dry incense ash. My grandfather resigned from his post that very afternoon and never spoke of the cemetery again for decades. It was only shortly before his death that he finally told my father the full truth. He admitted that every single night since that encounter at precisely 1:13 a.m., he had the exact same recurring nightmare. He would dream of the lantern keeper standing at the foot of his bed. With every passing year, the entity moved slightly closer. First, it stood at the bedroom doorway. Then, in the center of the room. By his final month alive, he said the figure was standing directly beside his pillow, its dark face hovering inches from his own. The night my grandfather passed away, our family was gathered around his hospital bed. The clock on the wall struck 1:13 a.m., and the lights in the room flickered and died. When the backup generator kicked on a second later, the small oil lamp on our family's ancestral altar suddenly ignited on its own. My grandfather stared fixedly at the dark corner of the room, gasped for air, and whispered one final sentence before his pulse went flat. "Don't let him pass the lantern." After the funeral, my father felt compelled to visit the old graveyard to burn incense in his memory. The guard hut was gone and most of the old plots had been moved. While clearing away tall weeds near an unmarked section, my father's shovel hit something hard. He dug up a heavy soil-covered oil lamp. The metal casing was completely rusted through, but the cotton wick inside looked brand new, perfectly white and unburned. Thinking it was just a historical curiosity, he brought it home. That night at exactly 1:13 a.m., I woke up to a faint smell of smoke. I walked into the living room and found my father staring in horror at the coffee table. The old lamp was burning brightly. There was no kerosene in the reservoir. No matches nearby. Just a dim yellow flame swaying softly in the dark. In a panic, my father grabbed a heavy woolen blanket and threw it over the lamp to smother the fire. When he pulled the blanket back a few seconds later, the lamp was completely gone. In its place sat a single piece of yellowed, fragile paper, covered in fresh, wet black ink. Written on it was a single line, "It is time to find a new lantern keeper." That happened 2 weeks ago. Ever since then, every night when the clock turns to 1:13 a.m., I hear the slow, rhythmic sound of barefoot footsteps pacing right outside my bedroom door. I haven't looked out yet, but I know the light is out there. This happened back in the spring of 1994, during my freshman year of college in eastern Iowa. Growing up in the Midwest, you get used to severe weather. Tornado warnings were just a part of life every spring and summer, something you acknowledged, but rarely took seriously. Almost nobody ever actually saw a tornado in person, let alone had one hit their house. It was just something that happened on the news to somebody else, miles away in an open cornfield. I was living off campus in a shabby 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town with my roommate Mujo. Mujo was an international student, a pre-med major whose family had fled the horrific Bosnian War just a year prior. While I spent most of my free time playing Super Nintendo, listening to grunge CDs, and looking for older guys to buy me cheap booze, Mujo possessed an insane, almost unbelievable work ethic. He would stay up until 3 in the morning every single night, endlessly flipping through heavy medical textbooks with the English to Bosnian dictionary sitting right beside him. Despite our completely opposite personalities, we hit it off quickly. I helped him practice his conversational English and introduced him to American pop culture, and in return he'd help me barely pass my introductory chemistry exams. His mother, who lived in a small apartment downtown, would frequently send over plastic containers filled with incredible home-cooked Balkan food. It was a chilly, overcast Friday in late April when the local news anchors began mentioning a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms, with a vague possibility of isolated tornadoes later that night. Around here, nobody panicked over weather forecasts. It was just white noise playing in the background while you ate dinner. By 9:30 p.m., a light rain was falling outside, creating a soft, rhythmic tapping on my bedroom window pane that easily lulled me to sleep. I awoke suddenly to a crack of thunder so impossibly loud it violently shook the picture frames hanging on my bedroom wall. A sudden, blinding strobe of intense lightning illuminated my room for a fraction of a second, revealing the massive oak trees outside bending violently against a wall of heavy, sideways rain. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I reached over to turn on my bedside lamp, but flipping the plastic switch did nothing. The power was completely dead. Then came the sound beneath the storm, a low mechanical drone that quickly rose in pitch until it transformed into a piercing, discordant wail echoing through the empty streets outside. The town's old air raid-style tornado sirens were blaring into the night. Before I could even swing my legs out of bed, a frantic, heavy knock sounded at my bedroom door and Mujo pushed it open. He stood in the dark doorway, lit only from below by the harsh beam of his yellow plastic flashlight. He was shaking visibly, his eyes wide and completely unfocused. Coming from a literal war zone in Eastern Europe, the sudden wail of nighttime sirens carried a deeply traumatizing meaning for him. To Mujo, that sound meant artillery shells and incoming airstrikes. "Hey, it's alright, man," I said immediately, throwing off my covers and putting a firm hand on his trembling shoulder. "It's just a weather siren. It's totally normal around here. They turn them on whenever the clouds look a little rough." "Sirens don't sound for no reason, Daniel," he snapped, his voice tight and trembling before he quickly caught himself and swallowed hard. "Sorry? Back home when the sirens start, you have seconds before the roof collapses." "Don't worry about it, man," I told him quietly, reaching into my closet to grab a heavy wool blanket and pulling my hand crank emergency weather radio off the nightstand. "Let's just head down to the basement until the storm passes. It's safer down there anyway." Our basement was a grimy, unfinished concrete space underneath the house, smelling perpetually of damp soil and ancient rust. It held nothing except a clanking water heater, a rusted circuit breaker box, and a few dusty wooden shelves overflowing with empty glass jars. We walked down the steep, creaking stairs and sat down directly on the cold concrete floor, leaning our backs against the cold foundation wall. Mujo sat beside me, his flashlight pointing up at the exposed wooden floorboards above us. I extended the radio's metal antenna and began turning the plastic hand crank until the static gave way to the familiar, monotone robotic voice of the National Weather Service automated broadcast. The National Weather Service in Quad Cities has issued a tornado warning for the following counties: Muscatine, Louisa, and Southern Johnson. Take cover now. Move to an interior room on the lowest floor of a sturdy building. The automated broadcast carried on in its flat, synthetic rhythm, describing severe wind speeds and atmospheric pressure drops. But right mid-sentence, the electronic cadence of the broadcast subtly shifted. The voice didn't pause, nor did the audio cut out, but the actual words being synthesized suddenly changed. Pa told us all to go inside. Doppler radar has indicated this storm system may contain destructive hail up to 2 inches in diameter. Mujo and I looked at each other instantly, the dim beam of the flashlight bouncing between our pale faces. Did that radio just say? Pa told us all to go inside? Mujo whispered, his eyebrows pulling together in utter confusion. Must be a signal bleed from a local farm radio, I lied, trying to quickly mask the strange sudden knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Or maybe a glitch at the broadcast station. It's an old radio. The storm outside grew exponentially louder. Hail began pelting the tiny ground-level basement windows near the ceiling, sounding like handfuls of marbles being violently thrown against the glass. A minute later, the emergency radio interrupted its own automated weather bulletin with another loud, harsh warning chime. If no structural shelter is available, lie flat in the nearest ditch or other low spot. The sky was green. The roosters were crowing before the sun even came up. Doppler radar indicates an area of rotation. My skin instantly prickled with severe goosebumps. The strange interjections were coming faster now, seamlessly woven directly into the automated weather alerts as if they had been coded into the official government script. Ma put me in the cellar. She said I had to pray. I prayed we'd be safe. Take cover now. Is someone broadcasting over the emergency frequency? Mujo asked, his knuckles turning completely white as he gripped the plastic casing of the flashlight. Is this some kind of sick college prank? It's not fucking funny if it is, I murmured, staring intently at the tiny speaker holes on the radio. Outside, the wind began to howl with a terrifying high-pitched screech that sounded less like weather and more like a jet engine idling right in our driveway. The sirens out in the distance began to pitch up and down, warping strangely in the heavy atmosphere. The radio crackled violently with static as the robotic announcer spoke once more, its flat, emotionless tone sending a chill straight down my spine. The chickens were screaming. Ma was crying so hard she threw up. The wind smelled like wet dirt and hot metal. Take cover now. I sat completely frozen on the cold concrete floor. Every single hair on my arm stood dead on end. The voice felt fundamentally wrong, too deliberate, almost terrifyingly intimate, as if it were describing a real horrific memory happening in real time to someone else decades ago. Then, without warning, the tornado siren outside abruptly cut off mid-wail. The heavy hail pelting the basement windows suddenly slowed down to a gentle, harmless tap. The harsh storm wind seemed to die down into an eerie, quiet breeze. On the radio, the automated announcer's voice smoothly returned to a standard weather update, stating in its robotic tone that the severe cell had weakened and the immediate danger had officially passed for our area. See. I breathed out a massive sigh of relief, leaning my head back against the concrete wall and standing up to stretch my cramped legs. Warning's over. It moved past us. Let's go back upstairs and try to get some sleep. I reached down and firmly clicked the radio's plastic power switch to the OFF position. The very second the switch clicked off, the completely unpowered speaker blared with a sudden, deafening burst of static. I saw Ma sleeping in the old oak tree. Her dress was tangled on a high branch. One of her shoes was higher up in the tree than she was. The chickens were spread across 3 fields. I found Pa in the cornfield near the road. He wasn't put together right anymore. Take cover now. I recoiled violently, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I couldn't breathe. The radio's power switch was set to off. The hand crank wasn't turning. Yet the plastic speaker grill was physically vibrating with the heavy sound of that synthetic voice. Panicked and thoroughly spooked, I reached down, grabbed the radio by its antenna, and slammed it hard against the concrete floor. The cheap plastic casing cracked wide open, sending the internal circuit board, tiny copper wires, and metal components scattering across the dusty floorboards. Absolute, suffocating silence returned to the basement. "Let's just get out of here," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably as I turned toward the wooden stairs. I took just one step onto the bottom wooden tread when a faint, metallic whisper echoed directly from the smashed circuit board lying in pieces on the floor. "Take cover now. Take cover now. Take cover now. Shut the fuck up," I screamed, turning around to violently kick the broken pieces into the dark corner of the cellar. Before my foot could make contact, Mujo suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my arm. His grip was painfully tight, his fingers digging deep into my muscle. "Listen, Daniel," he whispered, his voice completely drained of color. "Listen to the house." I froze. Past the sound of my own heavy, ragged breathing, I heard a deep, rhythmic, subterranean rumble out in the distance. It didn't sound like thunder and it didn't sound like wind. It sounded precisely like a heavy freight train barreling down a metal track at 100 miles an hour, driving directly toward our living room. Except there were no train tracks within 5 miles of our house. "Take cover now." A massive wave of pure adrenaline spiked through my blood. Mujo and I didn't say another word. We dove into the tiny, cramped corner underneath the wooden staircase, pulling the thick wool blanket over our heads, wrapping our arms around each other's necks, and pressing our bodies flat against the cold concrete floor. 2 seconds later, the entire world tore completely apart. The atmospheric air pressure in the basement dropped so fast and so violently that both of my eardrums popped with an agonizing, sharp burst of blinding pain. The floorboards directly above our heads were violently ripped away into the sky with a sound like splintering giant bones, followed immediately by the deafening, screeching roar of twisting metal gutters and shattering window glass. The violent vortex of the tornado reached down into the open basement, pulling furiously at our clothes, our hair, and our blanket, trying with immense physical force to drag us out of the corner and suck us up into the roaring black void above. Dust, insulation, pulverized drywall, and sharp wooden splinters rained down on us like shrapnel. I squeezed my eyes shut as hard as I could, holding on to Mujo with every ounce of physical strength I possessed, praying to whatever God was listening, until the overwhelming roar finally knocked me completely unconscious. We survived. When Mujo and I finally woke up under a pile of heavy debris, the entire 2-story house was completely gone, shredded into tiny splinters of kindling and scattered across 3 miles of open Iowa farmland. The bare concrete basement box was the only single part of the property that remained intact. The emergency weather broadcast had quite literally saved our lives by keeping us down in that basement for those extra few seconds, even if I still, to this day, cannot logically explain what entity or memory was speaking through that unpowered radio speaker. That terrifying night was over 30 years ago. Tonight, a massive, historic severe storm system is rolling through my hometown. I'm sitting in the finished basement of my own home right now, holding my wife's hand tightly while she gently rocks our month-old baby girl to sleep in the dim light of a battery-powered lantern. Outside, the rain is pouring down in thick sheets, and the town's tornado sirens have just stopped their long, eerie wailing after 20 minutes of non-stop alerts. The heavy wind outside sounds like it's finally calming down, transitioning back into a light, steady drizzle. "I think we're finally in the clear, babe," my wife whispers softly, letting out a long sigh of relief as she pulls up the local radar map on her bright smartphone screen. The main storm front is moving east toward the river. I pull out my own cell phone to send a quick text to Mujo, who is now a successful surgeon living 2 states over, just like I have done every single time a major storm hits our area for the last 3 decades. Before my thumb can even touch the messaging app, my phone violently vibrates in my grip, flashing a bright, neon red emergency alert notification box across the entire glass display. A fraction of a second later, my wife's phone chirps with the exact same loud, piercing emergency alert tone. I look down at the bold white text displayed on my screen, fully expecting to read the standard routine severe weather text issued by the county. But as my eyes scan the first few words of the prompt, every drop of blood in my body turns to solid ice. The notification reads, "Emergency alert, tornado warning in this area. Take shelter immediately." I sat in the basement with my wife and month-old daughter. I already knew what came next.